75-year-old Frank Morrison did the same thing every Thursday. Come to the range, fire his old .45, shoot 50 rounds, leave. Until the new manager kicked him out. "Our standards have risen," he said. "No place for old-timers." That's when Frank started making calls. One number. One code. Thunderbolt is compromised. The Patriot Arms indoor range sat on the outskirts of Virginia Beach, nestled between a strip mall and a used car lot. It wasn't fancy, just a converted warehouse with 12 lanes, adequate ventilation, and a gun shop that sold more tactical gear to wannabes than actual operators. But for Frank Morrison, it had been perfect. 23 years of Thursday afternoons, putting rounds downrange, keeping the skills sharp that had kept him alive in places most Americans couldn't pronounce. Frank wasn't a talker. Never had been. In the old days, that was an asset. In the jungle, the loud ones died first. Now, at 75, with hands that trembled just slightly from age rather than fear, silence was just easier. Let the young bucks brag about their Glocks and their tactical courses. Frank had his 1911, the same one he'd carried through 3 tours, and muscle memory that ran deeper than conscious thought. The previous owner, Mike Garrett, had understood. Mike was a Marine, Force Recon, who'd done his own time in places that didn't officially exist. He'd taken one look at Frank's membership application in 2000, noted the sparse details and the serial number that started with MACV, and never asked another question. Just handed over a range key and said, "Thursday afternoons are usually quiet," but Mike had sold the place 6 months ago. The new owner, Jason Fletcher, was 32, had an MBA, and thought military service meant his 6 months in the National Guard before washing out. He'd renamed the place Tactical Thunder Range, installed neon lights, and started hosting Instagram-worthy operator training courses for suburban dads who wanted to feel dangerous. Frank had ignored all of it. Every Thursday, 2 p.m. sharp, he'd walk in wearing the same faded olive drab jacket, check in at the counter, buy 2 boxes of 45 ACP, and head to lane 12. Always lane 12. 50 rounds, slow fire, each shot deliberate. Not showing off. Just maintaining. He should have seen it coming. It was the 3rd Thursday in November when everything changed. Frank walked in to find the usual crowd, a mix of serious shooters and tactical tourists. The serious ones nodded at him. They recognized another member of the tribe, even if they didn't know his story. The tourists ignored him, too busy taking selfies with rented rifles they didn't know how to hold properly. Jason Fletcher stood behind the counter, explaining to a customer why the $3,000 custom AR-15 was basically what the SEALs use. He glanced up as Frank approached, and his expression soured. "Morrison, we need to talk." Frank said nothing, just waited. He'd learned long ago that most people would fill silence if you let them. "Look," Jason continued, clearly uncomfortable but pushing through, "we're rebranding. Going upscale. Attracting a younger, more dynamic clientele." Frank remained silent. "The thing is, some of our new members have complained. Said you make them nervous. The way you shoot, the way you stare. It's intimidating." "I keep to myself," Frank said quietly. First words he'd spoken in the building in months. I know, but image matters, and frankly." Jason gestured vaguely at Frank's appearance, the worn jacket, the age-spotted hands, the slight stoop that comes with carrying too much for too long. "You don't fit our new demographic. I've been a member for 23 years. Under previous management, things change." Jason pulled out an envelope. "Here's a full refund of your annual fee. Prorated, of course. I think it's best if you find somewhere else to shoot." Frank looked at the envelope but didn't take it. "I'd like to shoot my 50 rounds first. Already bought the ammo." Jason's face reddened. "No, I need you to leave. Now, this is a business decision, nothing personal." Thursday afternoon, lane 12, that was the agreement. "There is no agreement." Jason's voice rose, drawing attention from other customers. "This is my range, and I decide who shoots here. And I've decided that doesn't include you. Now get out before I call the police. Frank stood perfectly still for 10 seconds. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out an old flip phone, and dialed a number from memory. "What are you?" Jason started. Frank held up one finger. "Wait." The phone rang twice before a voice answered. "Authentication. Morrison, Frank. 77 Whiskey Alpha. Confirm secondary. Thunderbolt is compromised." There was a pause. Then, "Understood. Location, Patriot Arms, Virginia Beach. Now Tactical Thunder. 20 mics." The line went dead. Frank closed the phone and looked at Jason, who had gone from angry to confused. 20 minutes, Frank said. "Then I'll leave." 20 minutes for what? Who did you just call? Frank walked to one of the plastic chairs in the waiting area and sat down. "My friends." Jason Fletcher had never served in combat, but he'd watched enough movies to recognize danger when it walked through his door. The problem was, it didn't look like the movies. They arrived in groups of 2 and 3. No dramatic entrance, no synchronized movements. Just men, and a few women, walking into his range like they owned it. Some wore civilian clothes. Others were in various stages of military dress. All of them moved with the same deliberate economy, like predators conserving energy. The first pair were young, maybe mid-20s. Clean-cut, athletic, wearing jeans and t-shirts that didn't quite hide the fact that they were armed. They walked to the counter, looked at Jason, then at Frank, then took positions by the door. "Can I help you?" Jason's voice cracked slightly. "Just here to shoot," one said. Virginia accent, but with something underneath. "That's what this place is for, right?" Before Jason could answer, more arrived. 2 men in their 40s, wearing motorcycle leathers. Then a woman in running gear who looked like she could bench press Jason. Then 3 guys who might have been accountants except for the way they checked angles and exits. Within 10 minutes, there were 15 of them. Within 15, 25. By the time Frank's 20 minutes were up, Tactical Thunder Range contained 32 of the most dangerous people in Virginia Beach, and every one of them was looking at Frank Morrison. An older man, silver-haired with a face carved from granite, approached Frank's chair. He wore a simple black polo and khakis, but Jason could see the edge of a tattoo on his forearm, a skull wearing a green beret. "Thunderbolt," the man said. Frank stood, lightning. They shook hands, the kind of handshake that spoke of shared history written in blood and silence. "Heard you were having trouble. New management," Frank said, nodding toward Jason. "Doesn't want my business." The silver-haired man turned to Jason. His expression was pleasant, almost friendly. Somehow that made it worse. "Is that right? Frank Morrison isn't welcome here." Jason tried to stand straighter. "It's a business decision. We're cultivating a different clientele." "I see." The man looked around the range, taking in the neon signs, the tactical merchandise, the Instagram photo booth Jason had installed. And what clientele would that be? Younger shooters? Influencers? People who appreciate modern training methods? Several of the assembled veterans made sounds that might have been laughter or disgust. "Modern training methods," the silver-haired man repeated. "Tell me, Mr. Fletcher." "Jason Fletcher, I own this place." "Mr. Fletcher, do you know who Frank Morrison is? A customer? Former customer?" "No." The man's voice remained pleasant, conversational. "Frank Morrison is MACV-SOG. Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, Studies and Observations Group. You know what that means?" Jason shook his head. "It means that when the regular special forces had a mission too dangerous, too impossible, too insane to attempt, they called SOG. And when SOG needed someone for a mission that even they thought was suicide, they called Frank Morrison." The range had gone completely silent. Even the tourists had stopped taking selfies. "That's ancient history," Jason managed. "This is a business." 3 Purple Hearts, another voice called out. A black man in his 60s, wearing a Marine Corps ball cap. 2 silver stars. Distinguished Service Cross. And a chest full of medals that don't officially exist for missions that never happened. The kind of man, a woman added, who spent 18 months behind enemy lines. Solo. Living off bugs and rainwater, calling in airstrikes on targets that shortened the war by years. Saved my father's life, one of the younger men said. Lai Ki, 1969, dragged him 3 miles through VC territory with 2 bullets in his own back. Saved my whole team, another added. Laos, 1970, held off 2 companies of NVA with a busted M60 and pure fucking will. Jason's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. He looked at Frank, who stood quietly in the center of it all, uncomfortable with the attention but not denying any of it. Here's what's going to happen, the silver-haired man said. Frank is going to shoot his 50 rounds. Lane 12, like always. Then he's going to come back next Thursday, and the Thursday after that, and every Thursday until he decides he's done. And you're going to smile and thank him for his business. You can't threaten. I'm not threatening anyone. The man pulled out his wallet, extracted a credit card. In fact, I'd like to purchase annual memberships for all my friends here. 32 memberships at. What's your annual rate? $400. Excellent. That's $12,800. Plus, we'll all need range time today. Lanes, ammunition, the works. Should be quite profitable for you. Jason stared at the credit card. It was black, with no limit indicated. The name read, Colonel James Mitchell, Ret. Of course, Mitchell continued, we'll all be coming back. Regularly. Together. I hope that won't be a problem for your demographic. What followed was the most surreal afternoon in Tactical Thunder's short history. 32 veterans, ranging from Vietnam-era ghosts to recent Afghanistan operators, took over the range with quiet efficiency. They didn't posture or show off. They just shot with the kind of casual competence that made Jason's tactical customers look like children playing with toys. Frank took lane 12, as always. But this time, he wasn't alone. Mitchell took lane 11. The Marine who'd spoken up took lane 13. They shot in companionable silence, the steady rhythm of controlled fire punctuated by the ping of brass on concrete. After his 50 rounds, Frank cleaned his 1911 with the same meticulous care he'd shown for 50 years. Around him, conversations sprouted, war stories told in shorthand, names of places and operations that meant nothing to civilians but everything to those who'd been there. Remember that clusterfuck in Cambodia? Someone said. Which one? Came the reply, followed by dark laughter. Heard you were at Khe San, 77 days. Lost 40 pounds and most of my hearing. Could be worse. Could have been with Morrison in Laos. They all looked at Frank, who was reassembling his pistol with practiced ease. How long were you over the fence that time, Frank? Frank thought for a moment. 5 months. Maybe 6. Hard to tell. Seasons don't mean much in the jungle. 6 months. Alone. Christ. Wasn't alone, Frank corrected quietly. Had Charlie for company. More laughter, the kind that comes from people who've learned to find humor in horror. Jason Fletcher watched it all from behind his counter, trying to process what was happening. His range, his tactical, modern, Instagram-worthy range, had been transformed into something else. Something real. Something that made his marketing slogans feel like the empty words they were. A young man in an Army Rangers t-shirt approached the counter. Hey, boss. Got any targets that aren't human silhouettes? What? Frank doesn't shoot at human shapes. Personal thing. You got any bullseyes? Simple circles. Jason fumbled under the counter, produced a stack of traditional circular targets. Perfect. Oh, and Frank's ammo, on my tab. Every week. Every week. Every Thursday, same time, same lane, until the end of time or Frank decides otherwise. Clear. Crystal clear. As the afternoon wore on, more people arrived. Word had spread through networks that existed outside social media, beyond cell towers, in places where loyalty was currency and honor was law. They came from Norfolk, from Richmond, from DC, active duty trying to look civilian. Retired operators who'd traded rifles for real estate. Men and women who'd answered when called and now answered a different call, the call to stand with one of their own. By 5 p.m., there were over 50 people in Tactical Thunder. The parking lot overflowed with vehicles ranging from pristine trucks to beaten motorcycles to one memorable Tesla with a Vietnam veteran license plate. Frank had long since finished shooting, but he remained, sitting in that plastic chair, overwhelmed by the response to a simple code phrase. Many of these people he'd never met. Some he'd served with directly. Others were connected by bonds of shared service that transcended unit patches or generational gaps. Thunderbolt, Colonel Mitchell said, sitting beside him. Haven't heard that call sign in 20 years. Didn't think anyone would remember. Are you kidding, Frank, Thunderbolt, Morrison? The ghost of MACV-SOG. Every operator worth his salt knows the stories. How you called in danger close artillery on your own position to save a Marine platoon. How you infiltrated that NVA headquarters with nothing but a knife and a radio. How you— Stories get bigger with time, Frank interrupted. I just did my job. Your job? Mitchell shook his head. Your job was staying alive for 142 missions over the fence. That's not a job, Frank. That's a miracle. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the controlled chaos of 50 veterans enjoying themselves at Jason Fletcher's expense. Every lane was full. The ammunition sales alone would make this the most profitable day in the Range's history. But Jason didn't look happy. He looked like a man reevaluating his life choices. Why do you call it in? Mitchell asked eventually. Could have just found another range. Frank was quiet for so long Mitchell thought he wouldn't answer. Then, 23 years. Same lane. Same time. Mike Garrett understood. Gave me a place where I could just be. Not Thunderbolt. Not the ghost. Just Frank, keeping his skills sharp, honoring the men who didn't come home by staying ready. He paused, watching a young female Marine put 10 rounds through the same hole at 25 yards. That kid Fletcher. He looked at me and saw a useless old man, an embarrassment. Bad for business. Frank's voice hardened slightly. I've been called a lot of things. Baby killer. Murderer. Hero. Ghost. But useless. That's new. So you reminded him that some old men have friends. Something like that. Mitchell grinned. Well, you certainly did that. I've got guys driving down from Quantico. Team guys flying in from Little Creek. Hell, I heard some Delta boys might make an appearance. That's not necessary. Yes, it is. Mitchell's voice was firm. You think this is just about you? It's about all of us. Every old warrior who gets looked at like a relic. Every Vietnam vet who still wakes up in the jungle. Every Afghanistan operator who came home to find nobody gives a shit about their sacrifice. This is bigger than one range or one asshole owner. As if to emphasize the point, the door opened and 6 more people entered. These ones were different, younger, harder, with the kind of purposeful movement that spoke of very recent combat experience. They wore civilian clothes but carried themselves like weapons. The leader, a compact man with sergeant's stripes tattooed on his forearm, scanned the room until he found Frank. Master Sergeant Morrison. Frank looked up, surprised by the use of his old rank. Just Frank now, son. Sergeant First Class Tony Rodriguez, 1st Special Forces Group. My grandfather was Lieutenant Rodriguez, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines. Key San, 1968. Frank's eyes widened slightly. Roberto Rodriguez, Platoon Leader, Fox Company. Yes, sir. You carried him 4 clicks to the med evac after he took shrapnel to the chest. Saved his life. He was a good Marine. How is he? Died last year, sir. But he lived to see his grandkids because of you. Told us the story every Christmas, about the SOG operator who appeared out of nowhere, patched him up, and humped him to safety while calling in fire missions on the radio. Rodriguez reached into his pocket, pulled out a small wooden box. He wanted you to have this. Frank opened the box. Inside was a Marine Corps car bar knife, worn but well maintained. The handle was wrapped in paracord, Vietnam-era style. Engraved on the blade were the words, "For Thunderbolt, who brought me home. Semper Fi." For the first time that day, Frank's composure cracked. His eyes misted as he held the knife, remembering a young Marine lieutenant who'd kept talking about his pregnant wife while Frank tried to keep him alive, pressing bandages against wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding. He talked about her, Frank said quietly. Maria, said he had to make it home for Maria and the baby. My mother, Rodriguez confirmed. She's outside, actually. Wanted to thank you herself but thought it might be too much. I'd like to meet her. Rodriguez smiled and headed for the door. The range had gone quiet again, everyone sensing they were witnessing something profound. Maria Rodriguez was in her 50s, with silver threading through black hair and her father's eyes. She took one look at Frank and embraced him, tears flowing freely. He described you so many times, she whispered. The guardian angel who saved him. Every year on March 15th, we'd light a candle and he'd tell the story again. How you appeared from the jungle like a ghost, covered in camouflage paint and ammunition, and refused to leave him behind. Frank held her awkwardly, this man who'd once spent 6 months alone in enemy territory now undone by a daughter's gratitude. I was just. Don't you dare say you were just doing your job, Maria interrupted, pulling back to look at him. You gave me a father. You gave my children a grandfather. You gave us 48 years we wouldn't have had. The crowd in Tactical Thunder had grown silent, even the tourists recognizing something sacred was happening. Jason Fletcher stood behind his counter, face pale, finally understanding what he tried to dismiss as ancient history. The rest of the afternoon became an impromptu reunion. More veterans arrived, drawn by the invisible networks that connected those who'd served in the shadows. Each had a story about Frank or someone like him, the quiet professionals who'd done impossible things in impossible places and then came home to anonymity. A Navy corpsman talked about a Marine firebase where Frank had appeared during a siege, called in danger close air support, then vanished back into the jungle before anyone could thank him. An Air Force pararescueman described finding a downed pilot alive because someone had left him hidden, bandaged, with water and a map to safety. The pilot's description matched Frank, though no SOG operation was ever acknowledged in that area. A CIA analyst, retired now and free to speak more openly, told of intelligence reports that filtered back from the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The NVA called him, Ma Lai, the Ghost. They put a bounty on him higher than any other American. 30,000 dong, dead or alive. You know what Frank did when he found out? What? Someone asked. Snuck into an NVA regimental headquarters and left a note, 30,000. I'm insulted. Signed it, Thunderbolt, with a smiley face. Even Frank smiled at that one. Seemed funny at the time, probably why they raised it to 50,000. As the sun began to set, Colonel Mitchell stood and addressed the room. Conversations died as he spoke. Gentlemen and ladies, I think we've made our point. Mr. Fletcher here has graciously agreed to maintain Frank's membership and weekly shooting schedule. He's also agreed to offer a 50% veterans discount, isn't that right, Mr. Fletcher? Jason, who hadn't agreed to any such thing but wasn't stupid enough to argue with a room full of special operations veterans, nodded quickly. Excellent. Now, I propose we make this a regular event. Every Thursday, 1400 hours, any veteran who wants to join Frank for his range time is welcome. We'll call it Thunderbolt Thursday. A chorus of hua, ura, and huya filled the range. Frank stood, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. That's not necessary. It is necessary, Mitchell interrupted. Because there are more Frank Morrisons out there. Veterans who've been told they don't fit someone's demographic. Warriors who've been dismissed as relics. Heroes who've been forgotten by everyone except those whose lives they saved. This is for all of them. He turned to Jason. Mr. Fletcher, you're about to have the most unique gun range in Virginia. One where real operators come to shoot alongside living legends. Market that properly, and you'll make more money than your Instagram influences ever could. And if you don't treat them right, the Delta operator added quietly, well, we know where to find you. It wasn't a threat. It didn't need to be. As the crowd began to disperse, Frank found himself standing outside with Colonel Mitchell, watching the sun set over Virginia Beach. The parking lot was still full of vehicles, veterans exchanging contact information, making plans for next Thursday. "This isn't what I wanted," Frank said. "I just wanted to shoot in peace." "I know." Mitchell lit a cigar, offered one to Frank, who declined. "But sometimes we don't get what we want. Sometimes we get what we need. And what's that? Reminder that we're not alone. That what we did mattered. That some punk with an MBA can't erase our history because we're bad for his brand." Frank was quiet for a moment. "Most of these guys don't even know me. They know enough. They know you were one of the ones who went into the dark places so others didn't have to. They know you came home when many didn't. They know you're still standing, still shooting, still ready. That's all they need to know." A car pulled up, a practical sedan driven by Maria Rodriguez. She rolled down the window. "Mr. Morrison, would you like to have dinner with us? My mother would love to meet you. She still has all of Dad's letters from Vietnam, including the ones where he mentions you." Frank looked at Mitchell, who smiled. "Go, be social, it won't kill you." "Thursday?" Frank asked. "Thursday," Mitchell confirmed. 1400 hours. Lane 12. And probably lanes 1 through 11 as well. Frank climbed into the car, still holding the car bar knife Roberto Rodriguez had wanted him to have. As they drove away, he saw Jason Fletcher through the window, frantically typing on his computer. Probably trying to figure out how to market Thunderbolt Thursday, without understanding what it really meant. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Lane 12 would be waiting next Thursday. What mattered was that an old warrior had been reminded he wasn't forgotten. What mattered was that a community had stood up and said, "Not this one. Not on our watch." The following Thursday, Frank Morrison arrived at Tactical Thunder Range at exactly 1400 hours. The parking lot was already half full. Inside, Jason Fletcher stood behind the counter, wearing a new shirt that read, "Home of Thunderbolt Thursday," and looking like he'd aged 5 years in a week. "Mr. Morrison," he said, his voice carefully respectful. "Lane 12 is ready for you, sir. Ammunition is on the house." Frank nodded, noting the changes. The Instagram photo booth was gone. In its place was a small memorial, a display case containing patches, coins, and photographs donated by veterans. A sign read, "In honor of those who served in silence, Lane 12 was indeed ready." But so were lanes 11, 10, 9, and 8. Colonel Mitchell was already there, along with the Marine from last week, 2 of the young Rangers, and Maria Rodriguez. "You shoot?" Frank asked her, surprised. "Dad taught me. Said it was a skill everyone should have. Especially the daughter of a Marine." Frank smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. Roberto always was a smart Marine. Redundant phrase, but still. They shot together in companionable rhythm. 50 rounds from Frank's 1911. Hundreds more from the growing Thunderbolt Thursday crew. The sound was like thunder, appropriate for the call sign that had once struck fear into enemy hearts. Between magazines, veterans shared stories, techniques, wisdom. Young operators learned from old warriors. Vietnam vets discovered their sacrifice hadn't been forgotten by the newest generation. Afghanistan veterans found mentors who understood the weight of coming home from an unpopular war. And at the center of it all, Frank Morrison shot his 50 rounds with the same precision he'd shown for over 50 years. Each shot a prayer. Each target a promise. Each Thursday a reminder that some bonds transcend time, distance, and even death. Jason Fletcher watched it all from behind his counter, slowly beginning to understand that he'd stumbled into something much bigger than a business opportunity. He'd become the accidental curator of living history, the host of a weekly gathering that honored the best of American military tradition. He'd wanted to cultivate a demographic. Instead, he'd inherited a legacy. And in Lane 12, Frank, Thunderbolt, Morrison, ghost of MACV-SOG, continued to shoot. Not because he had to anymore, but because he could. Because men had died to give him that right. Because he promised to remember them with every trigger pull. Because some Thunderbolts never really fade, they just wait for the right storm to remind the world they still exist. The sign on the door now read, Tactical Thunder Range, where heroes shoot, but everyone who mattered called it something else. They called it Frank's Place. And every Thursday at 1400 hours, it transformed from a simple gun range into something more, a temple to those who'd served, a classroom for those who would serve, and a home for those who understood that the only easy day was yesterday. Lane 12 was always reserved, just in case Thunderbolt wanted to shoot. He always did.